Check Podcasts. Hi, I'm Bruce Williams. I'm the CEO of the Greater Victoria Chamber of Commerce. Welcome to Chamber Chats, as always being recorded here in the podcasting studios of the Czech Media Group, one of our chamber champions. I'd like to acknowledge, of course, as always, that I live and work in the unceded ancestral territory of the Lekwungen-speaking nations, known to us as the Songhees and the Esquimalt nations. And what we do here at Chamber Chats is made possible by the support of Island Savings, a division of First West Credit Union. We always talk about local. Shop local, think local, do local. So today, as well as think local, we're going to talk about drink local. We're going to talk to a couple of people that manufacture some products. Some of them have alcohol and some of them don't, but they're brand names that you know very well. Kristen Needham is the founder and CEO of Cider in Central Saanich. Hi, how are you?
Hi, great. Thank you for having me.
And another very familiar brand is Phillips. And Jim Lister is the president and general manager of Phillips. Jim, nice to see you again.
Hey, also, thank you for having me as well.
So the question we very often ask, Kristen, I'll start with you. You meet somebody for the first time, they say, so what do you do? What's your answer?
You know, keeping it simple, I say I grow apples and I make cider. Of course, there's a little bit more to it than that. And over the years, I've done a lot. You know, I've worn every hat in the company. But you know, at the core of it,
I get it. The core. You said core. I got that right. Saw what you did there. Yeah.
We're first and foremost an orchard-based cidery. And so we've got a 10-acre farm on the Saanich Peninsula. And when you come visit, it's, you know, we've got 1,200 apple trees. And then out of those apples, we produce both alcoholic and non-alcoholic cider.
Yeah, and it's a spectacular property, but we'll come back to that. Jim Lister, everybody knows the name Phillips, but if you meet somebody who hasn't heard the name, what do you say to them?
I would say down the same road as Kristen. We certainly we make beer, and we do our very best to support people having a great time when they want to imbibe in trying all the great things that we make around here, giving them an opportunity to enjoy in those occasions and experiences with something great to drink and refreshing.
Yeah, and you both have amazing branding that goes along with that too. And of course, Phillips has sodas, and you have some distilling of gin and things. We'll touch on that in just a second here. But both of you, Kristen, I'll come back to you for this. There are some big worldwide brand names in cider, Strongbow and people like that. What made you decide that you would go up against them?
Because I think we can do it better. Because I think we can change the way that people think about cider. I saw a real opportunity 20 years ago when, you know, the large, and there's, you know, I say that tongue in cheek. I think that we have such a tremendous opportunity, first and foremost, because of the growing conditions here on the island for growing cider apples, and to be able to, you know, grow the apples that we're using in our cider and using local BC fruit for our cider. You just can't create the same product if you're using concentrate from Poland. So, you know, I think there's a lot to be said for a high quality product that's made with locally sourced ingredients. And so, you know, I see that we're not in the same niche as those global brands. But we also, you know, we had a lot of work to do to kind of, what would I say, help people figure out what cider really was. Because I think as well, what we were up against were people who thought, well, what is cider? Is it an alcopop? Is it like Mike's Hard Lemonade? Does it have to have apples in it? And so there's been, you know, it's thankfully cider's going through this renaissance and people are more and more understanding what cider is, but we never really saw the global brands as competition.
Okay, because you're just so intensely local.
Yeah.
And Jim, in the beer world, holy cow, I mean, people somehow still think that Lucky Beer is local, which it's not. But you're up against Molson and Sleeman and Heineken and all these guys. Tell me about fitting into that whole world.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. Certainly, they command the lion's share of beer consumption in really every market, but certainly in our market here locally, they still sell an awful lot of beer to an awful lot of people. So they're very much relevant in as much as people choose to drink them. But we very thankfully enjoy an awful lot of local support. And you know, our approach has long been you can't you can't fight them. You have to do things differently than them. And one of the ways that we do it is in our approach to what we make. We aim to use better ingredients. We aim to use as many local inputs in what we make and use as possible, and certainly hire as many local, whether they're trades or whether they're employees here at the brewery. We look to be, act, and embed ourselves in as much localness as we can, and then get back to our community and try to connect with people on a much more personal level than brand on a shelf. Yeah, try to personalize, I guess, who we are with the real people who make the great things we do.
Well, the taste of it is just so tremendously better. I mean, I had an old buddy from Ontario here about a month ago, and we went out for lunch, and he ordered a Coors Light, and I said, no, 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 no. You have much better options. Like order a Blue Buck, do something like that. And he did, and he went, oh my God, this is so much better than what I've been drinking in Ontario, which is true. Jim, let's stick with you for a second about the local ingredients. Tell me about how local that is and how you source them.
Yeah, sure. And one of the biggest maybe differentiating factors for us as a brewer is we're very much uniquely invested in doing our own on-site malting. So that what that involves for people who aren't familiar is malt is one of the main ingredients in making beer, and malt is a process of that's conducted on barley, which is grown in many farm fields. And in our case, we source locally here from the island. About a third of our malted barley comes directly from the island, most of it right on the Sandwich Peninsula. We malt it here on site, which gives us an opportunity to really connect closely to to the main ingredient in beer, other than water, and to get a real sense of pride in being connected to the local farm community and the agricultural world around us, and kind of get closer to that 100-mile, desired sort of 100-mile diet mentality that so many here on the island are very proud to take part in.
Yep.
And a huge part of our input for us is in fact that, and that's probably the biggest thing, other than the water, again, like I mentioned, being obviously local, but the grain being local as well is very unique to us, and we're very proud of that effort to do that, and um, happy to show people around what we do. And unfortunately, it's not always that easy to talk about, but we're immensely proud of the fact that we do it and we try it, and it makes our beer different.
You mentioned water, which we're going to come back to in a minute, but we're also going to focus in on some of the different brands that you both produce. So, Kristen, you talk about the size of the orchard you have at Cider. How many different varieties of apples do you actually have there?
So at the Cider Orchard on Mount St. Michael, we grow over 60 varieties. And these are varieties of apples you wouldn't find in the grocery store or even at the farmers markets. They've got funny names like Kingston Black and Dabonet and Chisel Jersey and Brown Snout. And they're most of them are inedible. They're all just good for cider.
Brown Snout. We have a chamber event coming up soon. I'm going to ask you about that when we get there. Okay, next though, it's all about the water, the base of it all. We're going to talk about that next. On Chamber Chats today, we're talking with a couple of local producers of beverages that we all love to enjoy. Kristen Needham is the founder and CEO at Cider, and Jim Lister is the president and GM at Phillips Brewery. Okay, Kristen, it all kind of starts and involves a lot of water. Tell me about the quality of the water and what's the factor in the creation of cider.
Right. So water for us is predominantly about irrigating our orchard and then cleaning and sanitation. So no water actually goes into the actual cider that we make. So water, though, for us is really important because when we have dry conditions like we have currently, we need to make sure our orchard is well irrigated. And so fortunately we're on the city system and are able to irrigate the orchard right now. So yeah, there's no water in the actual cider, but we still need it as orchardists.
So water is a source for beer, Jim. Same kind of thing. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly, very similarly, water. You certainly can't get grown barley without water supplying the crops. So, water for us starts there, and then is used broadly across the brewing process, whether it's in the malting of the barley that we source here locally, or whether it's in making a beer itself. Water is the main ingredient in beer, and similarly is also very heavily used in cleaning and sanitation for all of the stainless steel equipment that is used to make beer.
Beer and gin and sodas, and we'll come to that again in a second.
Exactly.
Now, I want to have some fun here and talk about some of your branding and how they differ, right? The different products that you do with the ingredients and the blends. So, for example, Kristen, there is a cider modeled after moonshine. Tell me about that.
That's right, Bruce. We've got a cider called Black Applejack, and for those that aren't familiar with the history of cider making in North America, applejacking referred to this process pre-prohibition, where you'd ferment the cider and you would freeze it, and in that way you would concentrate the alcohol by basically removing the water out of the cider. And so, and for a time in North America, that was illegal. So we thought we'd have a bit of fun with that history and call one of our ciders Black Applejack. So we're not doing anything illegal, of course. Now it's all above board, but it's one of our popular still ciders that we produce.
Okay. Little known fact, except for nerdy old radio guys like me, Dolly Parton does a song called Applejack that she did probably 35 years ago. So Google that
Good to
sometime when you get a
know.
chance. Yeah. Jim, what's Electric Unicorn?
Electric Unicorn, that's one of our very successful brands. It's a style of beer called a white IPA. And white means it's American wheat beer, so it's a little more white in color when you drink it, unlike a traditional IPA. A little bit cloudy, and presents different characteristics and flavor than what a traditional Northwestern or hazy IPA would otherwise. And really for us, that brand's about our opportunity to express. Sean O'Keefe, our label artist, tremendous talent in bringing forward really powerful imagery in the creating of the actual electric unicorn on our label. And we have a lot of fun with pretty well everything we make here, and certainly all things that Sean does, who's just a magician with his talented and creative artistry and drawing skills.
Yeah, if we have time, I want to talk about that a little bit more and what you do at Cider too. So you talked about moonshine. Moonshining was something where alcohol was made during Prohibition when you couldn't. So Prohibition was the amendment to the U.S. Constitution that banned alcohol. You have a cider called Prohibition. Tell me about that.
Very true. And currently that cider is only available in the US. So we've been selling our cider into the US for now more than a decade. And the cider, you can find the same cider here, but it's called Rum Runner. And it's a cider that we've made by fermenting cider, primarily using Stayman's wine saps and an apple called a winter banana, and then aging some of that cider in rum-soaked bourbon barrels. And so when we were first producing this cider, we were using screech barrels from Newfoundland. And then shortly after producing it for the BC market, we had some interest from Whole Foods in the US. We started to ship it down there, but the US wouldn't let us call it Rum Runner. So we thought we'd be a bit cheeky and call it Prohibition.
See, now, rum runner is another term that goes around with Prohibition, as you may or may not know. But in the days when the U.S. had Prohibition, Canada didn't, there were boats that would go across the marine borders in places like Windsor and Detroit. And the rum runners were the people that smuggled the booze across. And in the wintertime, when the river would freeze, they would drive cars across the river loaded with booze. And that's where Al Capone got his stuff for. Anyway, I digress.
Well, and I'll say from our farm, from the cider house, you can look out over Harrow Strait and the Salish Sea, and you can see Rum Island, where the bootleggers would have stopped, as they would, ply their wares between Canada and the US and the various Gulf Islands. So we've got a sense of place, I guess you would say, in terms of our Rum Runner. And also, I just love that connection to the maritime provinces as well.
Yeah. There was also something that the rum runners did that back in the day, these are cars that had running boards on the side. So if they were driving across the ice, they would stand on the running board and use a 2x4 to press down on the accelerator, because in case the ice broke, they would jump off. And that was it. Anyway, that's a rum runner story. Free Ride Hazy IPA, Jim. Tell me about Free Ride.
Free Ride Hazy IPA, yeah, another very new. It's a newer brand to us, launched 2 years ago or a year and a half ago now, And the hazy IPA craze started out of the northeastern U.S. states, and it's a trend that's made its way across, as most beer trends do, across the U.S. and up into Canada. It's a style that's become very popular, quite ubiquitous with what people today think of when they think of IPA, and it's got much more fruity characteristics and less sort of piney, tree-based aromatics behind it. And the beer is, appropriately sort of 6.5% alcohol, really delicious. The art is leans very much into whimsy and fun, and it's got lots of color. And recently we developed a skateboard deck using the art that Sean designed for that beer as well. And it is yeah, it's kind of a lovely mix of the art on the label mixing with the art and making of the beer to give us an expression of a great new beer in our portfolio that people already seem to have fallen in love with.
Yeah, you can just talk about it with your friends when you're looking at the label when you're sharing a beer with
Yeah,
them. It's a little
yeah.
storytelling thing. Okay, next we're going to talk about the birds and the bees. Today on Chamber Chats, we are chatting with a couple of people who are in the beverage business around here. Kristen Needham is the founder and CEO of Cider, and Jim Lister is the president and general manager at Phillips, a brand that we all know and love. So, Kristen, tell me about the birds and the bees.
Well, I'll tell you the Seasider version of Birds
Yes,
and the
thank you.
Bees. The Birds and the Bees is one of our cider brands. It's one of our seasonal ciders, and appropriate to the name, we release it every spring. And basically, that cider is a composition of fermented apples plus local honey and lemon. And so it's one of our seasonals. So it's not we've just sold out of it currently, but it'll be coming around next spring. And it's part of what we call our Canadian Invasion series. And these are all ciders that start with a traditional apple cider base, but then we've infused them with something else and have had a little bit of fun with the flavor. So it's not strictly just apples.
It is all about the fun when you look at the branding and the labels and things that you both use too. Jim, beer in general is beer, but beer is divided into ale and lager. Is that correct?
That's correct. That would be similar to red and white wine. Yeah, that's sort of the basis for the beginning of the separation between the two. Yes, and there's far more styles and types of ale than there are lagers.
Yeah. And what is it a taste difference? Is that what it is? Is it an ingredient different?
Um, it is at its foundation. It's about the yeast used to make them, the yeast to ferment beer to get there, and the way that and the process for deriving how they're made. They're made differently with different yeasts that ferment differently.
Okay. So cider, Kristen, varying degrees of sweetness or dryness or carbonation or fizziness. Tell me about the difference in what you do at Sea Cider.
Well, the first thing is that when we started this whole adventure, we wanted to, recognize that cider is first and foremost about the apples, but using different varieties and different strains of yeast, you get very different types of cider. And we wanted to create a range of ciders that reflected different styles of ciders that you might see in different parts of the world, but with a Vancouver Island twist. And so, whether they're still ciders or sparkling ciders, they're sweet ciders or they're very dry ciders, everybody's palate is different. And we wanted to make sure then rather than a one size fits all cider, we were producing a number of unique styles of cider. And hopefully there's a cider for everybody.
Yeah. So, Jim, at Phillips, it's not just about the beer because a few years back you got into distilling. You make something called Stump Gin. Tell me about that.
Correct. Yeah, we sure do. Yeah, as an expression of fun and the freedom that the people that work here do. And Matt, our founder, had a real passion for trying things, and he decided, almost 10 years ago now, that it wouldn't be great. It wouldn't be great to try our hand at distilling, and found in a farmer's field somewhere in the interior of the country and across the prairies a lovely old beat up still that was from Hiram Walker, that's over 100 years old, that lives here in our brewery today. That's the originating source of the spirit that goes into our stump gin. The 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 gin gets made with, as all gin does, starts in a pot still, ends up going through a column still to clarify and clean it, as clear spirits do, and then we have a foraged, right here off the island, collection of botanicals that we infuse the gin with. It gives it that really deep, rich, West Coast rainforest feel, which is what we want people to experience. Is if you were walking through a rainforest, whether raining or shortly after raining, and you get just overwhelmed by the beautiful aromas and feeling and sensory experience of that you would get that when you either open the bottle and smell it or put it near your mouth or drink it. And we're very proud to say we think we've done a great job of that.
Yeah. And of course, if you make gin, you need tonic. You got some of that
Yeah,
too. You got the tonic,
absolutely.
spark
Yeah,
mouth and stuff.
absolutely. Why not? Yeah. So again, just down the line of expressing ourselves into challenging ourselves to make things that we wouldn't typically make as brewers, we thought, well, why not? Why not make tonic? That seems fun. Turns out it is very fun, and you can have a lot of express yourself creatively in a lot of ways with flavor, and we're doing things differently, much like we do in beer, much different than the Schweppes or Canada Dry tonics of the world. We can create and develop much more flavored, much deeper, more rich, more complementary with the spirits that we make, styles and types. And we have an opportunity to put them out in the local grocery and retail trade here that we get tremendous support from also. And we're really, really quite thankful the fact that where we're located, we've got so many great local and independent grocers here on the island that are very quick and happy to support us.
Yeah, and then you've got a line of soda pop as well. But to wrap it up here, that references what you make that's non-alcoholic. And Kristen, let's remind people too that not all of your cider is alcohol-based, right?
Correct. In fact, now it's one of our really biggest growth categories at Cider. We have a line called the Temperance Series, and these are non-alcoholic ciders. We've got 5 in the series so far. So ranging from a strictly apple sparkling juice, essentially, to one called Temperance Ava, which is made from apples and elderflower and apricots, and a number of others in there.
There's so much more to talk about, but we're going to have to do it another time. Thank you so much for being here. Kristen Needham is the founder and CEO of Cider, and Jim Lister is the president and general manager of Phillips Brewery. Thank you both for being here. Thank you for being so local and so good.
Thank you very much for having us.
You bet.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
You bet. I'm Bruce Williams. We'll see you again for another Chamber Chat.